Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. I wanted to make a video about a topic that is not getting nearly as much coverage as it should and talk about the fact that I believe Conor McGregor, yes, Conor McGregor is using performance enhancing drugs with the blessing of the UFC and USADA. And not only is he using some sort of banned substance under the USADA policy, I believe the UFC and USADA and McGregor are all conspiring to 100% cover this up. And I'm not doing some type of clickbait article. There's some people out there, on MMA YouTube who will make some crazy headline and then, make up shit for 15 or 20 minutes talking about nothing, basically just talking in circles and making up stuff the entire time. That is not what this video is. I'm going to talk about the news that recently came out, how I talked about it an actual month ago, before really anybody was talking about it. And then also I'm going to talk about why has there been no media coverage on this? Because this is actually a big story. We're going to talk about the few outlets and few people that have actually, talked about this story. But I believe this is a massive story that's not getting talked about enough. And we're going to dive into each and every facet of this story. And then also I'm going to tell you what I believe is truly going on and whether it's right, whether it's wrong, and this has nothing to do with a dislike of Conor McGregor, because I know a lot of people follow this channel and they say, oh, you don't like Conor McGregor. That has nothing to do with this. But I believe that the UFC and USADA and Conor McGregor are 100% up to no good. So first off, I did a video about a month ago saying, I think the title of the video was, does the UFC intentionally manipulate USADA to protect star UFC fighters? And the story I'm going to get to here in a second, I actually mentioned that in the video. I talked about it for maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes, something along those lines. But I was talking about so many instances that I didn't really go in depth with this one as much as I probably should have. But now that more people are talking about it, I was like, you know what? I'm going to make another video discussing this because it really should be discussed. But going back to that video, and I'll link it down in the description, basically I talked about how the UFC gave a pass to Brock Lesnar. They gave him an exemption, for him to not be in the USADA testing pool for a substantial period of time before he fought Mark Hunt. And then sure enough, after his fight against Mark Hunt at UFC 200, he tested positive. Or the whole picogram incident with John Jones, where they moved the fight with Alexander Gustafsson to an entire different state on a week's notice because of some weird test results, findings within John Jones samples that were collected by USADA. And there's just, instance after instance where you can look and you can say, well, this doesn't really seem right. And I'm not the type of person who goes out there and says, oh, I saw this guy's Instagram photo and he looks muscular, so he must be on steroids. Or this guy is, really good. He became champion. He must be on steroids. He must be on PEDs. I'm not one of those people. But I believe when you look at all these, this circumstantial evidence, you can draw a conclusion, because this is a very unique situation with USADA and Conor McGregor and the UFC that you don't see very often. But I'll link that video down in the description if you guys want to go check it out after this one. And also, before I get into exactly what came out, James Lynch made a good video on this, covering this topic as well, covering the exact story that I'm talking about. So I'll link his video down in the description as well if you guys want to go check that out as well. There's not a lot of people talking about it. And that's what actually really disturbs me about this, because when you look at Conor McGregor, he's the biggest star in MMA, maybe the biggest star we've ever seen, most likely the biggest star we've ever seen. He can't fart and accidentally shit his pants without these huge MMA media outlets, MMA Fighting, MMA Junkie, not doing a full story about it. They'll do a full write-up. Conor McGregor thinks he has to fart and he accidentally shits his pants. And I just find it incredibly bizarre. They'll cover that. They'll cover every tweet. He'll tweet out 3 words. They'll cover it in a full story, but they aren't covering this story. So the person who put out this story, but this has been known for a couple months now, is TSN's Aaron Bronstetter. He put out an article, and it's funny because they are direct. He works for TSN, which is a direct TV partner for the UFC. He put out an article, and he put out a tweet with the article. He said, after cross-referencing the entire active UFC roster with USADA's athlete test history database, I found that Conor McGregor was the lone active fighter, aside from some athletes who signed after August 1st, to not be tested by USADA. So Conor McGregor has not been tested in the entire of 2022. Now, full disclaimer, he was tested 11 times in 2021. He fought in January of 2021. That's where he got KO'd by Dustin Poirier. And then they had the rematch. Well, really, it was the trilogy in July at UFC 264. And this is where he got, beat up for an entire round. And then he broke his leg at the end of the first round. It was a round he was going to get 10-8 in anyway, but it ended up being a TKO doctor stoppage. And Conor McGregor has not fought since then. There was some speculation he was going to fight the end of 2022. It does not look like that's going to happen. And right now the speculation is that maybe he fights in early 2023. But I feel like the UFC would have already announced that. He's not fighting in January. So best case scenario, maybe February or March. But that's a topic for a whole nother video. But how insane is that? He has not been tested. He is the only UFC fighter who was on the roster before August 1st of this year that has not been tested. Just for reference, and also, I'll put a link to the Twitter thread from Aaron Bronstetter's Twitter where he put out some more information, but just some cliff notes from that. Among those who have been tested in 2022 are John Hathaway, Travis Brown, and Sheldon Westcott, all who have not competed in the promotion for more than 5 years. Just for reference, Travis Brown has not fought since July of 2017. John Hathaway, most of you fans from nowadays probably haven't even heard of him. He has not fought since March of 2014. That is straight up insane. That's 8 years ago. He's being tested in 2022. Travis Brown's all but retired. And I'm going to get to it in a second why I believe that Conor McGregor, best case scenario, is using something on the USADA banned substance list, but he may very well be using steroids or PEDs. But I want to first address why, just this story alone, that Conor has not been tested by USADA, should be a much bigger story. And I talked about it earlier, they'll post a full story, a full article for every tweet that Conor McGregor puts out. But they're not covering the fact that he hasn't been tested by USADA in the entire year of 2022, which is, it's 10 months in. We're 10 months into the year. It's almost 2023, and Conor hasn't been tested. And, if you've been following the channel for any substantial period of time, I've talked about this plenty of times. But what happens is the UFC is very selective at who they let cover the sport in person, come to the events, come to the press conferences. And what happens is there has been media members banned from covering live events for the UFC, effectively ending their careers. And basically what goes on is these journalists, these MMA media members, they don't want to get on the UFC and Dana White's bad side, because what will happen if they piss Dana White off, if they piss the UFC off, they will then be barred from covering the events. Now, don't get me wrong, they can cover it from home, but it's just not the same. Some of these guys, their main focus is in-person interviews, attending press conferences, attending media scrums. And effectively, if they get banned, that ends their career in a way. So what happens is these huge websites like MMA Junkie, like MMA Fighting, I'm sure there's other ones that I can't think of off the top of my head. If they cover stories that the UFC deem as negative press and they don't want these media members to cover, Dana White and the UFC will be very vindictive and they will lose potential access, whether they're actually banned or not, but they may lose access to potentially interviewing Dana White or star fighters. And with Conor McGregor in the past, people want to interview him. And I know he hasn't done a lot of interviews, in the last year or so, but they don't want to lose access to potentially interviewing MMA's biggest stars. So that's why they're not covering it. And, I really think it's disgraceful. I understand, so I'm kind of sympathetic to the fact. I get it. What are they going to do? They're going to get barred from attending any of the events when that's what they've done for years and they've been covering the sport. But at the same time, I feel like they have an obligation to cover things like this, when they're posting articles about every tweet that Conor McGregor posts or Nate Diaz posts, and now they're not covering this. And what I really believe is going on, because regardless of whether you agree with my assessment that I believe that Conor McGregor is using some type of banned substances, I think that everyone can agree there's something fishy going on here. The fact that he is the only current UFC fighter on the active roster before August 1st that has not been tested, I think is a massive red flag. And, you know, shout out to TSN's Aaron Bronstetter for covering this and bring this to light. I talked about it in a video about a month ago. I went and looked up on USADA's website myself when I was talking about the UFC protecting their stars from potential USADA doping violations. So shout out to him. But what I find so interesting here is the fact you have fighters that have seemingly been retired and they're being tested. Meanwhile, Conor McGregor, and I'm not the one to diagnose PED use off of Instagram pictures, but Conor McGregor looks massive, absolutely massive. His physique has changed. He looks like a 185-pounder at this point. But again, muscle definition doesn't necessarily mean steroid use. People always say, oh, this guy's got a massive physique. Anderson Silva is a skinny guy, was using PEDs at some point in time. John Jones, you know, not necessarily skinny, but not necessarily like Paulo Costa jacked or Kamaru Usman jacked. Using PEDs, got popped for PEDs. But what I believe is truly going on here is I think, you know, Conor McGregor broke his leg at UFC 264, okay? I'm not a medical doctor. I don't know what they prescribe to use that, whether it be steroids or other banned substances or something that would be considered a PED. I think the UFC and USADA, based on doctors' advice, have given Conor McGregor an exemption to use some of these banned substances while he's rehabbing his broken leg. Because a snap like that, I mean, who knows the litany of prescriptions that Conor McGregor was using over the course of 2022 to get his leg back to 100%. And I know some people are going to say, you know, okay, well, if the doctors are prescribing it, why does it matter? Or USADA and the UFC are giving him an exemption, why does it matter? Well, it matters because even if they are giving him an exemption for a banned substance, I believe they still should be testing him because, okay, they know roughly this amount of this banned substance should show up in his system. But not testing at all leaves a massive loophole to be able to abuse the system. And what I found really interesting when I was looking at this, Chris Weidman broke his leg in April of 2021. Chris Weidman has been tested 4 times in 2022. And I know there's some speculation that potentially they don't get it, you know, to other countries as much, but they're testing guys that are out of the country all the time. Maybe, you know, I don't know. I haven't cross-referenced every fighter on the roster, but there is fighters in other countries that are being tested for PEDs. So you can't use that as an excuse. And even if the UFC wants to use that as an excuse, I don't think that's a fair excuse. Because if you're going to implement the system, you need full random drug testing. Otherwise, it does not work. And I think what's going on, like I said, is that the UFC and USADA has given him an exemption to use some type of banned substance in the healing of his leg. And I think the reason they're not releasing this, other than the fact they feel like, okay, well, they really shouldn't have, this is Conor McGregor's medical, you know, business. This is between the doctor and Conor McGregor. They don't want to see the headlines because the headlines will read Conor McGregor exempt using steroids, using banned substances. That's what the headlines will be. And I get it. That's not really fair to Conor because he's had this traumatic injury. Whatever he needs to heal it, I believe he should be allowed to use. But I just think this lack of transparency combined with the fact you have the mainstream MMA media not even covering it, I just think is a massive red flag, and it's not going to look good. It's going to eventually come out. You know, now you have, you know, Aaron Bronstetter covering it. Hopefully the next presser, you know, which isn't until UFC 280, the end of October. Or I guess they could ask during one of the fight nights, you know, if Dana White is even attends and does a scrum, what's going on here? Why isn't he being tested? I think we'll get a non-answer. I think they'll say, you know, they'll just brush it off and say, oh, well, this or that. And, you know, they'll really give a non-answer on why Conor McGregor has not been tested. But I think this is a story that should be covered more. Again, if this is prescribed by a doctor, whatever the banned substance may be, I think Conor McGregor should be exempt. I think he should be able to use it. But I think they still should be testing him and monitoring the levels of whatever potential PEDs, banned substance could be in his system. Because I just don't think it's fair you're testing guys like Travis Brown, Chris Weidman, you know, all these other fighters. You have John Hathaway. I couldn't even remember his name. I had to go back and look. John Hathaway. But you're not testing the biggest star in MMA in Conor McGregor. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.